You believe that to stop overthinking you need to fight and force your mind into silence. But Zen wisdom reveals the opposite. True calm doesn't come from inner war, but from peaceful observation. When you stop fighting your thoughts and learn to watch them like clouds passing in the sky, without clinging to any of them, something miraculous happens. The mind, which was once a storm, finds its own silence. Prepare yourself for sleep, because tonight, through ancient stories, you will learn to simply observe instead of fight. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment what part of the world you are watching from. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. Imagine sitting across from a Zen master, eager to receive profound wisdom, only to have your cup of tea overflow as they continue pouring. This seemingly simple moment contains one of Buddhism's most powerful teachings about overthinking. The parable of the empty cup has travelled through centuries, offering a timeless lesson on how our minds work and why they sometimes get stuck in endless cycles of thought. In ancient Japan, there's a story about a university professor who visited a renowned Zen master to learn about Zen. The professor had studied religious texts extensively and was quite proud of his knowledge. As they sat together, the master began serving tea. He poured the visitor's cup full and then kept pouring. Tea spilled over the rim across the table and onto the professor's clothes. Alarmed, the professor exclaimed, "Oh, stop! The cup is over full! No more will go in!" The master replied with a gentle smile, "Like this cup, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" This simple story elegantly captures what happens in our minds when we become overwhelmed with thoughts. When our mental cup is already filled to the brim with preconceptions, judgments, worries about the future, and regrets about the past, there's simply no room for new insights or perspectives to enter. The overfull cup represents the overthinking mind, constantly processing, analysing, and spinning in circles, yet paradoxically unable to absorb new wisdom. The concept known as beginner's mind, or Shoshin in Japanese Zen tradition, stems directly from this parable. Beginner's mind is fresh, open, and free from the burden of expertise. It approaches each moment with curiosity rather than assumption. When we practice emptying our cup, letting go of what we think we know, we create space for genuine learning and insight. Neuroscience has caught up with what Zen masters have taught for centuries. Our brains function better with fewer distractions. When we quiet the constant internal chatter, we can process information more clearly and make better decisions. Studies have shown that mindfulness practices inspired by Zen philosophy actually change brain structure, reducing activity in areas associated with rumination and enhancing regions related to clarity and focus. In daily life, we can practice the empty cup principle in simple ways. Before important conversations, take a moment to acknowledge what assumptions you might be bringing to the interaction. When facing challenges, ask yourself, am I approaching this situation with a cup already full of preconceived notions? Sometimes the most valuable response to a complex situation is simply, "I don't know," an acknowledgement that your cup has space for new understanding. Zen practitioners often incorporate formal rituals to regularly empty their cups. Morning meditation serves as a daily practice of emptying, sitting quietly and allowing thoughts to settle, creating mental space for the day ahead. The physical act of cleaning one's living space or work area can mirror this internal process, removing clutter from both environment and mind simultaneously. The empty cup also teaches us about the nature of expertise and learning. In Japanese martial arts, there's a saying that true mastery has 3 stages: the beginner who knows nothing, the intermediate student full of knowledge and technique, and the master who returns to simplicity. The master has integrated knowledge so deeply that they no longer overthink. They've emptied their cup of technical details to reveal the essence of their art. One powerful way to apply this teaching to combat overthinking is through a simple evening ritual. At the end of each day, imagine pouring out the contents of your mental cup, all the worries, plans, and unresolved issues collecting throughout the day. Feel the relief of letting them go, knowing you can pick up what's truly important tomorrow with fresh perspective. This practice helps prevent the accumulation of mental clutter that leads to insomnia and chronic overthinking. The parable also reminds us that wisdom often comes not from accumulating more information, but from clearing away what obscures our natural clarity. In our information-saturated world, where we constantly consume content through screens and devices, the ability to empty our cup becomes even more crucial. Sometimes the most productive thing we can do is create space by limiting inputs, turning off notifications, taking social media breaks, or simply sitting in silence. For chronic overthinkers, the empty cup parable offers particular comfort. It suggests that the solution isn't working harder to figure things out, but rather creating space for insights to arise naturally. When we stop forcing solutions and allow our minds to settle, we often discover that clarity emerges on its own, like sediment settling in a glass of water, revealing the clear liquid above. Zen teachers throughout history have emphasized that emptying the cup isn't just an intellectual exercise, but a physical one too. The posture we take during meditation, spine straight, shoulders relaxed, body balanced, creates the physical conditions for the mind to settle. Our physical cup must be properly aligned before our mental cup can truly empty. The practice of emptying extends beyond individual moments of meditation. It becomes a lifestyle approach, a willingness to regularly question our assumptions, let go of mental habits that no longer serve us, and approach each day with fresh eyes. In this way, the empty cup becomes not just a parable, but a practical path toward freedom from overthinking. What makes this ancient teaching so enduring is its simplicity and immediate applicability. We don't need special equipment or years of training to begin emptying our cups. We can start right now with this very breath by simply noticing when we're holding tightly to opinions or drowning in thoughts, and choosing to create a little space instead. In that space lies the potential for transformation and the natural wisdom that comes when overthinking subsides. Pechern, the monk and the tiger, living in the present moment in the face of fear. Have you ever noticed how most of our stress comes not from what's happening right now, but from replaying the past or worrying about the future? There's an ancient Zen story that captures this human tendency perfectly while offering a powerful alternative. The tale of the monk and the tiger has provided guidance to overwhelmed minds for centuries, teaching us one of life's most challenging skills, staying present even when faced with danger. The story goes like this. A monk walking along a mountain path suddenly finds himself being chased by a ferocious tiger. Running as fast as he can, he reaches the edge of a cliff. Looking down, he notices a vine growing from the cliff face. With the tiger closing in, the monk grabs the vine and swings himself over the edge. As he hangs there, he looks up to see the tiger prowling above him. Then he looks down and spots another tiger waiting at the bottom of the cliff. To make matters worse, two mice, one white and one black, begin gnawing at the vine he's clinging to. At this moment, the monk notices a wild strawberry growing from the cliff face nearby. Holding on with one hand, he picks the strawberry with the other, puts it in his mouth, and exclaims, "How sweet this strawberry tastes!" At first glance, this story might seem absurd. Who would stop to eat a strawberry in such a perilous situation? But that's precisely the point. This story isn't about literal tigers and strawberries. It's about our relationship with time and our tendency to miss the present moment, especially when we're caught in overthinking. The tigers in the story represent the past and future that constantly threaten to devour us. The tiger above symbolizes our past with its regrets and mistakes that seem to chase us wherever we go. The tiger below represents the future with all its uncertainties and potential dangers waiting to catch us if we fall. The mice gnawing at the vine, one white and one black, represent day and night, the passage of time that gradually brings us closer to death. These elements create the perfect metaphor for the human condition, suspended between past and future with limited time available to us. Most people caught in such a predicament would be completely overwhelmed with fear, desperately trying to escape or lamenting their fate. This represents the overthinking mind, constantly strategizing about escape, blaming ourselves for past decisions that led here, or anxiously anticipating the pain of being eaten. But the monk does something radical. He fully experiences the sweetness of the strawberry available in that moment. This doesn't mean the monk is in denial about his situation. He's fully aware of the tigers and the deteriorating vine, but instead of letting his mind spiral into panic or regret, he chooses to be fully present with what's actually available to him in that moment, the sweetness of a wild strawberry. The story teaches that even in our most difficult moments, there is something to be experienced fully if we can bring ourselves into the present. Neuroscience has confirmed what Zen Buddhists have known for centuries. Our minds are wired to time travel in ways that often create suffering. The brain's default mode network activates when we're not focused on a specific task, causing our thoughts to wander to the past and future. This mind wandering is directly linked to unhappiness and anxiety. When we practice presence, we engage different neural networks associated with attention and sensory awareness, reducing activity in areas linked to rumination and worry. In everyday life, we encounter smaller versions of the monk's dilemma constantly. Perhaps you're stuck in traffic, late for an important meeting. Your mind races with regret about not leaving earlier, the tiger above, and worry about the consequences of being late, the tiger below. Meanwhile, precious moments of your life are passing, the mice gnawing the vine. The practice inspired by this story invites us to notice what's actually available in this moment. Perhaps the warmth of sunlight through the window, the music playing on the radio, or even just the sensation of a single breath. Many people misinterpret this story as promoting escapism or ignoring problems. That's not the message at all. The monk doesn't pretend the tigers aren't there. He doesn't tell himself a comforting story about being rescued. Instead, he fully acknowledges his situation while recognizing that even in dire circumstances, present moment awareness offers something valuable that overthinking cannot provide. Mindfulness practitioners have developed numerous techniques inspired by this parable. One powerful practice involves identifying your personal tigers, the specific past regrets and future worries that most commonly pull you away from the present. By naming these tigers, we become more skilled at recognizing when they appear, creating the opportunity to choose presence instead. Another practice focuses on finding the strawberry moments in daily life, those small pleasures we often miss when caught in mental time travel. This might be the taste of morning coffee, the sensation of a hot shower, or a moment of connection with a loved one. By deliberately savouring these experiences, we strengthen our capacity to return to the present when overthinking takes hold. For those dealing with anxiety or trauma, this story offers particularly valuable wisdom. When overwhelming emotions arise, our instinct is often to fight against them or get lost in their story. The monk's approach suggests an alternative, acknowledging the difficulty while simultaneously connecting with something nourishing in the present moment. Therapists sometimes call this dual awareness, the capacity to hold both challenge and resource in our attention simultaneously. The monk and tiger story also reminds us that presence isn't just about positive experiences. Sometimes being present means fully feeling fear, sadness, or pain without adding the additional suffering of overthinking. When we can be with our direct experience, however difficult, without elaborating with stories about what it means about the past or future, we discover a freedom that's available even in challenging circumstances. Some Zen teachers suggest a daily practice of intentionally stopping several times throughout the day to taste the strawberry, to fully experience whatever is happening in that moment. This might mean pausing while washing dishes to feel the warmth of the water and soap on your hands, or taking a moment during a busy workday to feel your feet on the ground and notice 3 things you can see, hear, or feel in your immediate environment. What makes this ancient story so powerful is that it doesn't deny the reality of our challenges. The tigers are real, the fraying vine is real, our time is limited. But even within these constraints, we have the freedom to choose where we place our attention. And in that choice lies the possibility of experiencing life directly, rather than getting lost in the stories our overthinking minds create about it. The monk in the story demonstrates extraordinary mental freedom, not because he escapes his situation, but because he refuses to let fear of the past or future rob him of the only moment he actually has. This freedom is available to all of us, not just in dramatic life or death scenarios, but in the ordinary challenges and beautiful moments that make up our daily lives. The monk's ability to savour the strawberry while facing imminent danger demonstrates how the present moment offers refuge from overthinking. This approach to mindfulness doesn't require us to face life-threatening situations. We can practice it in our everyday experiences. Another powerful Zen concept that builds on this awareness is the meditation technique that views thoughts like leaves floating down a river. This practice provides a systematic way to disengage from the overthinking mind while still acknowledging its contents. The river meditation offers a practical method for relating to thoughts differently. Imagine sitting by a gentle stream, watching leaves drift along the current. Now apply this same witnessing quality to your thought process. Each thought that arises, whether a worry, a plan, a memory, or a judgment, is like a leaf that appears, moves through your awareness, and eventually floats away downstream. You don't need to dive in after the leaves or try to stop them from coming. You simply observe their natural flow. This metaphor isn't just poetic imagery. It represents a fundamental shift in how we relate to our thinking. Most people identify completely with their thoughts, experiencing each one as me or mine. When a difficult thought arises, like, I'm not good enough, or this situation will never improve, we tend to grab onto it, pull it ashore, and examine it endlessly. We might argue with it, try to replace it with a more positive thought, or get caught up in its story. The river meditation teaches a different approach, allowing thoughts to arise and pass away without intervention. Buddhist texts describe this quality of mind as non-attachment. Non-attachment doesn't mean not caring or becoming emotionally numb, rather C.S. Sud. It means not getting hooked or entangled in every thought that crosses the mind. It's the ability to witness mental activity without being swept away by it. When we practice the river meditation regularly, we develop what some traditions call the witness consciousness, the aspect of awareness that can observe mental content without becoming identified with it. Ancient Zen masters used rivers and streams as teaching tools precisely because moving water perfectly illustrates the transient nature of thoughts. Just as no two moments of a flowing river are identical, our thoughts are constantly changing, arising and passing away on their own. When we sit by an actual river, we don't feel compelled to control which leaves float by. We naturally adopt an attitude of curious observation. The practice invites us to bring this same quality to our internal experience. Modern psychology has validated this approach through numerous studies. Research on mindfulness shows that people who can observe thoughts without automatically believing or reacting to them experience less anxiety, depression, and stress. This skill, which psychologists call cognitive diffusion or decentering, creates psychological space between ourselves and our mental content. When we're fused with thoughts, a thought like, this is going to be a disaster, creates immediate bodily stress responses. When we're able to see it as just a thought floating by, we gain freedom to respond more skillfully. You can practice the river meditation formally or informally. The formal practice involves setting aside time to sit quietly, perhaps starting with attention on the breath, then expanding awareness to include the natural flow of thoughts. When you notice yourself getting caught up in a particular thought stream, gently label it planning, or worrying, remembering, and visualize placing it on a leaf to continue downstream. The informal practice involves bringing this same witnessing quality to everyday moments when you notice overthinking beginning to occur. What makes this practice particularly effective for chronic overthinkers is that it doesn't require stopping the thinking process, which can be incredibly difficult. Instead, it changes our relationship to thinking. Many people who struggle with overthinking have tried to force their minds to be quiet, only to find themselves in a frustrating battle with their own thoughts. The river meditation offers a ceasefire in this internal war. Thoughts are allowed to exist, but we no longer give them the power to consume our attention or dictate our emotional state. One common misunderstanding about this practice is the belief that the goal is to have no thoughts at all. This is neither possible nor desirable. The human mind naturally produces thoughts, that's its function, just as the heart pumps blood and the lungs breathe air. The goal isn't a thought-free mind, but rather a mind that can think when thinking is useful and rest when it's not. The river meditation helps us recognize when we're caught in unproductive thinking loops and gently shift into a more spacious awareness. Zen practitioners throughout history have reported that with consistent practice, they begin to experience longer gaps between thoughts, moments of pure awareness without mental commentary. These gaps aren't created through force or control, but emerge naturally as we stop habitually chasing every thought that arises. It's like a muddy pond that gradually becomes clear when we stop stirring it up. The sediment doesn't disappear, it simply settles, allowing clarity to reveal itself. The river meditation pairs beautifully with the strawberry moment from our previous story. When we're less entangled in our mental narratives about past and future, we naturally become more available to experience the present directly. We might notice the texture of our clothing against our skin, the subtle flavours in a simple meal, or the emotional quality of a conversation, experiences that overthinking typically obscures. People who practice this technique regularly often report significant changes in their relationship with difficult thoughts and emotions. One practitioner described it as learning that I have thoughts, but I am not my thoughts. Another noted that watching my anxious thoughts float by feels completely different than being my anxious thoughts. This shift in perspective creates psychological freedom even when challenging mental content continues to arise. The beauty of the river meditation lies in its simplicity and accessibility. While some meditation practices require specific conditions or extensive training, this approach can be implemented anywhere, anytime you notice overthinking taking hold. Stuck in traffic with racing thoughts, visualize them floating downstream, lying awake with middle-of-the-night worries. Watch them drift like leaves on the nighttime river. The technique meets you wherever you are. Through consistent practice, many people discover something surprising. Thoughts actually need our engagement to persist. When we stop feeding them with our attention and belief, many simply dissolve on their own. It's similar to what happens when we stop poking at a fire. Without additional fuel, it naturally begins to die down. The river meditation allows us to stop adding fuel to the fire of overthinking, creating space for natural mental clarity to emerge. The capacity to witness thoughts without attachment isn't just useful for managing everyday stress and overthinking. It becomes invaluable during life's most challenging moments. When facing difficult decisions, relationship conflicts, or major life transitions, the ability to observe our thought patterns without being completely identified with them allows access to deeper wisdom that overthinking often obscures. This witness consciousness that we develop through the river meditation connects directly to the concept of mental flexibility found in another powerful Zen teaching, the parable of the bamboo tree. While the river meditation teaches us to observe thoughts without attachment, the bamboo story shows us how to cultivate a mind that can adapt and remain strong through life's inevitable storms. The bamboo parable typically contrasts two trees facing a powerful typhoon, a mighty oak and a slender bamboo. The oak stands proud and rigid, refusing to bend in the fierce winds. The bamboo, meanwhile, sways dramatically, sometimes bending almost to the ground. When the storm passes, the oak has snapped and fallen, while the bamboo returns to its upright position, unharmed. The oak's very strength, its rigidity, becomes its downfall, while the bamboo survives through its flexibility. This simple nature observation contains profound wisdom about mental flexibility. Many of us approach life's challenges like the oak tree, believing that strength means rigidity, unwavering certainty, and refusing to yield. We hold tightly to our opinions, expectations, and plans, even when reality clearly demands adjustment. This rigid approach might seem strong on the surface, but it creates tremendous vulnerability when we inevitably encounter circumstances beyond our control. The bamboo represents an alternative kind of strength, one based on adaptability rather than rigidity. The bamboo's power doesn't come from resisting the storm, but from the capacity to move with it while maintaining its essential integrity. This perfectly illustrates mental flexibility, the ability to adapt to changing circumstances without losing our core values or sense of self. Overthinking often stems from rigid mental patterns, fixed expectations about how things should or be, inflexible beliefs about ourselves and others, and attachments to specific outcomes. When reality doesn't match these rigid structures, the overthinking mind kicks into overdrive, trying desperately to force situations into our preconceived notions, or ruminating endlessly about why things aren't going according to plan. The bamboo mind offers a different approach. Rather than holding tightly to expectations and fighting against reality, it remains open to what actually emerges. When plans change unexpectedly, the flexible mind adapts rather than breaking. When new information contradicts previous beliefs, the bamboo mind can integrate this without crisis. When relationships evolve in unexpected ways, mental flexibility allows us to respond to what is, rather than clinging to what we thought should be. Zen masters throughout history have used the bamboo as a teaching tool precisely because its physical properties so perfectly illustrate this mental quality. The bamboo's hollow core represents the concept of emptiness, or non-attachment to fixed views. Its segmented structure demonstrates how we can compartmentalize challenges rather than letting them affect our entire being. Its deep root system shows how flexibility works best when anchored in stable values and practices. Neuroscience research confirms the benefits of mental flexibility. Studies show that psychological flexibility correlates strongly with mental health outcomes, while rigidity is associated with various psychological disorders. When we approach life with bamboo-like adaptability, we activate brain regions associated with creativity and problem-solving, rather than the threat response areas triggered by rigid resistance to change. Cultivating the bamboo mind begins with awareness of our rigid thinking patterns. We all have areas where we tend to be inflexible, perhaps in how we think relationships should work, how we approach our professional lives, or in our daily routines and habits. Simply noticing these areas of rigidity creates the possibility of greater flexibility. The next step involves gently questioning rigid beliefs. Is it absolutely true? What if the opposite were true? What other perspectives might exist? One powerful practice for developing mental flexibility involves intentionally doing routine activities differently. Take a different route to work. Use your non-dominant hand for simple tasks. Rearrange your morning routine. These small physical changes help disrupt habitual thinking patterns and create more cognitive flexibility. Similarly, exposing yourself to viewpoints that differ from your own, through books, conversations, or travel, strengthens the flexibility muscle in your mind. The bamboo teaching also reminds us of the importance of recovery after bending. The bamboo doesn't just bend in the wind, it returns to its original position when the storm passes. Similarly, mental flexibility that isn't about abandoning all structure or boundaries, it's about having the capacity to adapt when necessary and return to center when possible. This rhythmic movement between adaptation and recovery builds resilience over time. People who embrace bamboo-like flexibility often discover an unexpected benefit: reduced overthinking. When we're not rigidly attached to specific outcomes or beliefs, there's simply less to overthink about. Disappointments don't trigger endless rumination about what went wrong. Unexpected changes don't provoke analysis paralysis. The flexible mind can acknowledge reality as it is and respond appropriately without excessive mental churning. A beautiful aspect of the bamboo teaching is its application to emotional flexibility as well as cognitive flexibility. Many of us have rigid rules about which emotions are acceptable and which aren't. We might believe we should always be positive, never show anger, or never experience jealousy. This emotional rigidity creates internal conflict when inevitable human emotions arise. The bamboo mind allows all emotions to move through, bending with their energy rather than breaking under their force. Zen practitioners often incorporate physical bamboo into their practice environments as a constant visual reminder of this teaching. Some meditation centers plant bamboo gardens where students can observe how these remarkable plants respond to changing weather conditions. Others keep bamboo stems in meditation halls, using them as focal points for contemplation of flexibility and resilience. What makes the bamboo teaching particularly valuable in our current era is how perfectly it addresses the pace and unpredictability of modern life. We live in times of rapid technological change, shifting social norms, environmental uncertainty, and global interconnection. Rigid approaches to these complex realities inevitably create suffering. The bamboo mind offers a way to remain grounded while adapting to our ever-changing world. This adaptability that the bamboo teaches isn't just about adjusting to external circumstances, it also involves flexibility in our thinking patterns. While the bamboo bends physically, our minds need tools to break free from rigid thought structures. One of the most powerful methods Zen has developed for this purpose is the practice of koans, particularly the famous koan Mu, which directly challenges our tendency toward dualistic thinking. Koans are paradoxical riddles or statements that Zen masters have used for centuries to help students break through the limitations of logical conceptual thinking. The word koan originally referred to a public case or legal precedent in ancient China, but in Zen practice it came to mean a case study in enlightenment, a tool designed specifically to short-circuit our habitual thought patterns and open us to direct experience beyond concepts. Perhaps the most famous koan in the Zen tradition is Mu. The story goes that a monk once asked Master Joshu, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" Joshu replied simply, "Mu." In Japanese, Mu is often translated as no or not, but in this context it points to something beyond affirmation or denial. It's not that the dog lacks Buddha nature, which would contradict Buddhist teaching that all beings possess Buddha nature. Rather, Mu challenges the very framework of the question itself. What makes Mu so powerful as an antidote to overthinking is that it directly confronts the root of much of our mental suffering: dualistic thinking. Humans naturally categorize the world into opposites: good, bad, right, wrong, success/failure, self-other. This binary thinking serves us well in certain practical matters, but becomes problematic when applied to complex human experiences. When we're caught in overthinking, we're often trapped in these false dichotomies. Either I make the perfect decision, or I'll completely fail, or either she loves me entirely, or not at all. The Mu Koan invites us to experience a reality beyond these limiting either-or frameworks. It doesn't provide an alternative concept to replace our dualistic thinking. That would just be another concept. Instead, it creates a kind of cognitive impasse that, when engaged with sincerely, can lead to a direct experience of reality unfiltered by our conceptual grids. Traditional Zen training with koans is quite structured. A student would receive a koan from their teacher and sit with it in meditation, not trying to solve it intellectually, but allowing it to work on them at a deeper level. When ready, they would meet with the teacher to demonstrate their understanding, not through explanation but through the embodied response. The teacher might ring a bell, make a gesture, or say something seemingly unrelated that nonetheless reveals whether the student has truly penetrated the koan's essence. For those of us not in formal Zen training, working with Mu can still be tremendously valuable for addressing overthinking. One approach is to use Mu as a meditation focus. When caught in circular thinking or false dichotomies, internally say Mu while exhaling. This isn't about using Mu as a distraction, but rather as a way to cut through the tangle of concepts that fuel overthinking. Another practical application involves noticing when you're caught in either-or thinking in daily life. When you catch yourself thinking, either I'm a success or a failure, or either this relationship is perfect or it's worthless, internally say Mu, to remind yourself that reality is vaster than these limiting categories. This doesn't mean avoiding making necessary distinctions or decisions. It means recognizing that our conceptual frameworks are tools, not absolute truths. The brain science behind why koans like Mu work is fascinating. Neuroscientists have found that when we encounter something that doesn't fit our existing mental models, the brain experiences what's called cognitive dissonance. This creates a state of productive discomfort that can lead to new neural connections forming. Koans deliberately create this dissonance, challenging our habitual patterns of thought. When we stay with this discomfort rather than quickly resolving it with a convenient answer, we create the conditions for insight to emerge. People who work with Mu over time often report experiencing moments when the mind's categorizing activity temporarily stops, and they experience reality directly without the usual filters of judgment and analysis. These aren't permanent states, but glimpses that can profoundly shift how we relate to our thinking. After such experiences, many find they can more easily recognize when they're caught in dualistic thought patterns and step back from them. A critical misconception about koans is that they're meant to be nonsensical, or that their purpose is to show that nothing makes sense. This misunderstanding sometimes leads people to dismiss koans as merely Eastern mysticism or word games. In reality, koans are sophisticated tools developed over centuries of practice and observation of how the human mind works. They don't reject logic, they reveal its limitations and point to ways of knowing that complement rather than replace rational thought. One of the reasons Mu is particularly effective for addressing overthinking is that it meets the problem at its source. Overthinking isn't just about thinking too much. It's about a particular kind of thinking that gets stuck in loops, creates false dilemmas, and mistakenly believes that more analysis will necessarily lead to clarity. Mu directly challenges these tendencies not by opposing them with different concepts, but by opening a door to an experience beyond conceptualization itself. In practical terms, working with Mu might look like this. You're faced with a difficult decision and find yourself overthinking, bouncing between options, creating elaborate scenarios of potential outcomes, and feeling increasingly anxious. Instead of continuing this pattern or trying to force a decision, you pause and breathe with Mu. This isn't about escaping the decision, but creating space around it, allowing yourself to experience the situation directly, rather than through layers of analysis. Often, after this shift in perspective, the path forward becomes clearer, not because you've figured it out intellectually, but because you've accessed a more intuitive knowing. The essence of Mu as a practice for overthinking is that it helps us recognize when we're trapped in conceptual thinking and offers a way out, not into another concept, but into direct experience. In this way, it shares something important with the bamboo teaching. Both point to a kind of freedom that comes not from having the right thoughts, but from holding all thoughts lightly, with flexibility and non-attachment. This quality of holding thoughts lightly rather than grasping them tightly connects beautifully with another profound teaching from Eastern wisdom traditions, the practice of Wu Wei, or non-doing. While Mu helps us break through conceptual limitations, Wu Wei offers guidance on how to engage with life's activities without the exhausting effort that characterizes overthinking. Wu Wei is often translated as non-action or non-doing, but these translations can be misleading. It doesn't mean doing nothing or being passive. Rather, Wu Wei refers to action that arises naturally, without forced effort or struggle, action that's in harmony with the natural flow of things. The Chinese character for Wu Wu means without or lacking, and Wei Wei means action or doing, but together they point to effortless action rather than no action at all. This concept originated in Taoism but was incorporated into Zen Buddhism as it developed in China and later Japan. Wu Wei is often explained through natural metaphors. Water flowing downhill doesn't try to flow, it simply follows its nature. Plants don't force themselves to grow, they simply grow when conditions are right. These aren't just poetic images, but point to a profound understanding of how effective action can arise without the strained effort that often accompanies overthinking. The connection between Wu Wei and overthinking is direct and practical. Much of our overthinking stems from a misguided belief that if we just think hard enough, analyse thoroughly enough, and plan meticulously enough, we can control outcomes and guarantee success. This approach creates a state of constant mental strain as we try to force clarity through sheer cognitive effort. Wu Wei offers a radical alternative, allowing understanding and action to arise naturally when the mind is allowed to settle. This doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or thoughtful consideration. Instead, it suggests that our best thinking happens not when we're straining mentally, but when we allow spaces between thoughts. It's similar to what happens when we can't remember someone's name. The harder we try to recall it, the more elusive it becomes. Yet when we stop trying and allow the mind to relax, the name often pops up effortlessly. Modern psychology has identified what's called the default mode network in the brain, a set of brain regions that activate when we're not focused on a specific external task. This network plays a crucial role in insight, creativity, and perspective taking. Interestingly, it functions best not when we're actively trying to solve problems, but when we allow the mind to wander or rest. This scientific finding aligns perfectly with the ancient wisdom of Wu Wei. Practically speaking, how can we apply Wu Wei to address overthinking? One approach is to deliberately schedule periods of non-doing throughout your day. These aren't times for productivity, or even formal meditation, but simply spaces where you allow yourself to be without any agenda. You might sit in a chair and gaze out the window, take a leisurely walk without destination or purpose, or lie on the grass and watch clouds drift by. These periods aren't lazy procrastination, but strategic mental resets that allow natural clarity to emerge. Another practical application involves noticing when you're straining mentally, when you feel that characteristic tightness that comes with trying to force understanding or solutions. This awareness itself creates an opportunity to shift into Wu Wei. Take a few breaths, physically relax your body, especially your forehead, jaw and shoulders, where we often hold tension during overthinking, and allow yourself to temporarily let go of the problem. This isn't giving up, but rather creating the conditions for effortless insight. Many people who struggle with overthinking have tried the opposite approach, thinking even harder, analysing more thoroughly, making more lists, or spending more hours deliberating. Wu Wei suggests that more effort isn't always better. Sometimes the most productive thing we can do is stop trying so hard and allow natural understanding to emerge. This requires trust in a process that doesn't feel like doing anything, but can actually be more effective than forced mental effort. The workplace offers a perfect example of how Wu Wei can transform overthinking. Imagine you're working on a complex report and find yourself staring at the screen, words not coming, thoughts circling without progress. The Wu Wei approach would be to recognize this stuck state and deliberately step away. Perhaps to water a plant, make tea, or take a short walk. And this isn't procrastination, but a strategic application of non-doing that often results in renewed clarity when you return. Many creative professionals and knowledge workers have discovered this principle through experience, even without knowing the term Wu Wei. Sleep offers another powerful example of Wu Wei in action. Have you ever gone to bed with a problem unresolved, only to wake with fresh insight? During sleep, the conscious, effortful mind rests while unconscious processes continue working. We literally make progress by not trying. We can apply this principle more deliberately by sleeping on important decisions rather than forcing conclusions when our thinking is unclear. One common misconception about Wu Wei is that it means acting impulsively or without any planning. This misunderstanding can lead people to dismiss the concept as impractical in our complex modern world. In reality, Wu Wei isn't about abandoning forethought, but about finding the right balance between effort and allowing. It might include careful preparation followed by a period of letting go, allowing insights to emerge naturally rather than trying to force them. Another misconception is that Wu Wei is purely passive. In fact, it often involves tremendous activity, but activity that flows naturally rather than being forced. Think of an experienced athlete, in the zone, performing complex movements with precision, yet without the sense of effortful strain that a beginner would feel. This state of effortless effectiveness is the essence of Wu Wei. The relationship between Wu Wei and mindfulness is worth noting. While mindfulness often involves deliberate attention to present experience, Wu Wei emphasizes allowing natural awareness and action to arise without straining. These approaches complement each other. Mindfulness helps us notice when we're caught in overthinking, while Wu Wei offers a way to engage with life's challenges without adding the suffering of excessive effort. In our achievement-oriented culture that often equates effort with virtue, Wu Wei offers a refreshing counter-perspective. Sometimes less effort leads to better results. This isn't laziness, but strategic non-doing, creating the conditions for natural clarity and effectiveness, rather than trying to force them through sheer mental strain. For chronic overthinkers, this approach can be not just effective, but profoundly liberating, offering a way to accomplish what needs doing without the exhausting burden of the constant mental effort. This approach of strategic non-doing that Wu Wei teaches us can be further enhanced by making changes to our physical environment. The internal and external worlds are deeply connected, and Zen traditions have long recognized that creating order in our physical space can directly impact the clarity of our minds. This brings us to one of the most distinctive Zen practices, the art of the Zen garden, or Karasen Tsui, which offers powerful lessons on how external simplicity supports internal calm. Zen gardens originated in Japanese monasteries during the Kamakura period around the 12th century. Unlike Western gardens focused on colourful flowers and abundant vegetation, traditional Zen gardens use minimal elements, typically rocks, so gravel or sand, and perhaps a few carefully placed plants. The most famous example is Ryoanji Temple Garden in Kyoto, which consists of 15 rocks arranged on a bed of carefully raked white gravel surrounded by earthen walls. At first glance, it might seem austere, or even empty to someone expecting conventional beauty, but this simplicity is precisely the point. The physical act of creating and maintaining a Zen garden serves as a form of moving meditation. Monks would spend hours meticulously raking the gravel into patterns, straight circular lines, or concentric circles around the rocks, requiring full attention to the task at hand. This practice naturally pulls the mind from overthinking into direct experience. You simply cannot rake patterns perfectly while your mind is wandering through worries about the future or regrets about the past. The activity demands presence. The visual effect of a well-maintained Zen garden also has a calming impact on the mind. Research in environmental psychology has shown that viewing ordered, simple environments can reduce cognitive load and mental fatigue. When we look at a space with fewer elements and clear organisation, our minds don't have to work as hard to process what we're seeing. This creates a sense of mental space and rest that contrasts sharply with the cluttered environments many of us inhabit in modern life. You don't need to be a monk or have a traditional Japanese garden to apply these principles. Many people create miniature desktop Zen gardens, small trays of sand with a few rocks and a tiny rake, that serve as both a visual reminder of simplicity and a tool for mindful moments throughout the workday. Taking just 3 minutes to rake patterns mindfully can interrupt cycles of overthinking and bring the mind back to the present. On a larger scale, we can apply Zen garden principles to our living and working spaces. Consider how the rooms where you spend most of your time affect your mental state. Cluttered, disorganized spaces often correlate with cluttered, disorganized thinking. This doesn't mean you need to become a minimalist overnight, but even small acts of intentional ordering can have profound effects on mental clarity. Try this simple experiment. Choose one area that you see frequently throughout your day, perhaps your desk, a coffee table, or your bedside stand. Remove everything from this space, clean it thoroughly, and then very deliberately return only the items that serve a clear purpose or bring genuine joy. Arrange these items with intention, creating visual space around each one. Notice how you feel when you look at this area compared to more cluttered spaces in your environment. Many people report a sense of relief and mental spaciousness when they create even small islands of order in their surroundings. The practice of maintaining a Zen-inspired space isn't about achieving some perfect aesthetic ideal. It's about creating an environment that supports mental clarity rather than contributing to mental noise. Think of it as setting up external conditions that make overthinking less likely and present moment awareness more accessible. Just as it's harder to maintain healthy eating habits when surrounded by junk food, it's harder to maintain mental clarity when surrounded by physical chaos. Another powerful aspect of Zen garden philosophy is the concept of ma, the Japanese word for the space or interval between things. In Western culture, we often focus on objects themselves, trying to accumulate more or better possessions. Zen aesthetics draws our attention to the empty space between objects, teaching us to value absence as much as presence. This perspective directly counters the more is better mentality that often fuels overthinking. You can experiment with ma by intentionally creating more space in your environment, between furniture pieces, between items on the shelves, even between appointments in your calendar. This physical spaciousness tends to translate into mental spaciousness, giving thoughts room to arise and dissipate naturally rather than crashing into each other in an endless chain reaction of overthinking. The principles of Zen gardens can extend beyond visual space to sound environments as well. Many people live with constant background noise, televisions, notifications, traffic, household appliances. That creates a kind of auditory clutter parallel to physical clutter. Creating periods of intentional quiet, even for short durations, can have a similar effect to clearing physical space. This doesn't require complete silence, which might actually be uncomfortable for many people, but rather a reduction in unnecessary noise pollution. One particularly effective practice combines physical ordering with mindful attention. Choose a small area to organize, a drawer, a shelf, or a corner of a room. Rather than rushing through the task while thinking about other things, approach it as a meditation. Feel the objects in your hands. Make deliberate decisions about what stays and what goes, and arrange the remaining items with full awareness. This practice trains the mind to focus on one thing at a time, a powerful antidote to the multitasking that often feeds overthinking. Zen monks have traditionally viewed the care of their physical environment as an extension of their spiritual practice, not separate from it. In monastery life, tasks like sweeping the courtyard, arranging the meditation hall, or tending the garden weren't chores that distracted from real spiritual work. They were the spiritual work itself. This integrated approach offers a valuable perspective for our compartmentalized modern lives, where we often separate meaningful activities from maintenance activities. The connection between external order and internal clarity isn't just philosophical, it's being confirmed by contemporary research. Studies in cognitive science show that our physical environments significantly impact our cognitive processing. Working in cluttered spaces has been shown to reduce focus and increase stress hormones, while ordered environments support sustained attention and reduce mental load. The Zen gardeners were onto something profound when they developed their practice of creating external harmony to support internal peace. This principle of mindfully engaging with our physical environment extends naturally to another quintessential Zen practice that transforms an everyday activity into a profound mindfulness ritual: the Japanese tea ceremony, or Shadeo, literally the way of tea. While Zen gardens teach us how spaces affect our minds, the tea ceremony shows us how ordinary activities can become extraordinary gateways to present moment awareness. The Japanese tea ceremony evolved from Chinese tea practices, but was profoundly shaped by Zen Buddhism, particularly through the influence of the tea master Senno Rikyu in the 16th century. What might seem at first glance like an elaborate way to serve a simple beverage is actually a comprehensive mindfulness practice disguised as a social ritual. Every element, from the arrangement of the tea rooms to the precise way the host whisks the powdered green tea, is designed to bring participants fully into the present moment. The ceremony begins well before any tea is served. Guests typically walk through a garden path designed to create a transition from the ordinary world to the special atmosphere of the tea room. This passage serves as a decompression zone where participants can begin to let go of everyday concerns and overthinking patterns. Upon entering the tea room through a small entranceway that requires bowing, humbling the self, guests encounter an environment of deliberate simplicity. The traditional tea room contains minimal decoration, perhaps a hanging scroll with calligraphy and a simple flower arrangement appropriate to the season. During the ceremony itself, every movement the host makes is choreographed and performed with complete attention, from the way charcoal is arranged to heat the water, to the precise angle at which the tea bowl is presented to each guest. These aren't arbitrary formalities, but rather practices that demand complete presence. You cannot perform these movements correctly while your mind is wandering through worries or plans. The physical precision naturally pulls attention to the here and now. What makes the tea ceremony particularly relevant to combating overthinking is how it elevates an ordinary, everyday activity to an art form through the quality of attention brought to it. We all drink beverages daily, often while doing something else, checking emails, watching television, or lost in thought. The tea ceremony suggests that any activity, no matter how mundane, can become extraordinary through full presence. This perspective directly counters the tendency to rush through routine activities while our minds are elsewhere, one of the main patterns that feeds overthinking. The principle at work in the tea ceremony is captured in the Zen phrase Ichigo Ichie, which translates roughly to one time, one meeting, or once in a lifetime. This concept reminds participants that each tea gathering is a unique event that will never be repeated in exactly the same way. The same people might gather again, but they will be slightly different. The season will have changed, the mood will vary. This awareness of uniqueness and impermanence invites a quality of attention that's antithetical to habitual overthinking, which often treats the present as merely a means to some future end. The formal tea ceremony might seem inaccessible or impractical for most modern lives, but its principles can be applied to any everyday activity. Many people create personal tea rituals that bring ceremonial attention to their morning coffee or afternoon tea. This might involve using a special cup, taking time to notice the aroma, feeling the warmth of the beverage, and drinking mindfully without simultaneously doing other tasks. Even 3 minutes of this kind of focused attention can interrupt patterns of overthinking and remind us how to be fully present. The 4 principles that guide the traditional tea ceremony, harmony, ways, respect, ki, purity, sei, and tranquility, yaku, offer a framework that can be applied to other daily activities as well. Preparing a meal with attention to harmony between ingredients and presentation, approaching interactions with others with genuine respect, bringing a sense of purity or clarity to work tasks, and cultivating tranquility through deliberate pacing. All of these translate ceremonial awareness into ordinary life. What's particularly valuable about the tea ceremony as a mindfulness practice is that it doesn't require sitting still in meditation. For many people who struggle with overthinking, the prospect of sitting quietly with their thoughts for extended periods can initially be overwhelming. The tea ceremony offers an active alternative, a way to practice mindfulness through movement and engagement with objects and the processes. This mindfulness in action can be more accessible for those whose minds tend to race when they attempt to sit still. The sensory richness of the tea ceremony also makes it an effective interrupter of abstract overthinking. When we're caught in circles of worry or rumination, we're typically engaged with concepts and scenarios rather than direct experience. The ceremony brings attention systematically through all the senses: the visual aesthetics of the tea room, the sound of water heating, the smell of the tea, the taste of its bitterness and sweetness, the feel of the bowl in the hands. This full sensory engagement naturally pulls the mind from abstraction to concrete experience. Modern brain research supports what tea masters have known intuitively for centuries. Multisensory experiences that require focused attention activate regions of the brain associated with presence, while deactivating the default mode network associated with mind-wandering and overthinking. The ceremony creates the perfect conditions for this beneficial neural state, not through complex technology, but through the simple act of paying complete attention to preparing and drinking tea. Perhaps the most profound aspect of the tea ceremony is how it blurs the distinction between everyday life and spiritual practice. It suggests that enlightenment isn't found by escaping ordinary activities, but by bringing extraordinary attention to them. This perspective offers a practical path for addressing overthinking in busy modern lives, not by adding more activities to already full schedules, but by transforming how we experience the activities we're already doing. The way of tea teaches us that the antidote to overthinking isn't necessarily thinking less, but being more fully present with whatever we're doing. This integration of mindfulness into everyday actions like the tea ceremony reminds us that spiritual practice isn't separate from daily life. In this same spirit, Zen masters throughout history have taught that wisdom often begins not with accumulating more knowledge, but with embracing what we don't know. This brings us to one of the most counterintuitive yet powerful approaches to overthinking, cultivating what Zen tradition calls the don't know mind. There's a famous story about Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who founded the first Zen Buddhist monastery in America. After giving a talk, a student approached him with a complex philosophical question. Suzuki Roshi smiled and simply replied, "I don't know." The student was initially disappointed, expecting a profound answer from such an accomplished teacher. Only later did the student realize that "I don't know" wasn't an evasion, but the profound teaching itself. This quality of mind, being comfortable with not knowing, runs directly counter to our cultural conditioning. From early schooling through professional life, we're trained to have answers. We feel embarrassed when we don't know something and often pretend to understand rather than admitting uncertainty. This pressure creates a particular kind of suffering where we feel we must think our way to certainty about everything, from major life decisions to minor daily choices. The Japanese term for this quality is shoshin, often translated as beginner's mind. A famous quote from Suzuki Roshi captures its essence. In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few. When we approach situations thinking we already know what they are, how they work and what should happen next, we severely limit what we can perceive and understand. Our preconceptions become a kind of filter that only allows in information that confirms what we already believe. Overthinking often stems from this very trap, the belief that if we just think hard enough, we can figure everything out and eliminate all uncertainty. We get caught in circular thinking patterns trying to resolve questions that might not have definitive answers or attempting to predict outcomes that are inherently unpredictable. The don't know mind offers an alternative, not giving up on thinking altogether, but holding our thoughts and conclusions more lightly. The practice of not knowing isn't about cultivating ignorance or refusing to learn. It's about recognizing the limits of conceptual knowledge and being willing to stay open to direct experience even when it challenges our existing frameworks. It means approaching situations with genuine curiosity rather than rushing to categorize them based on past experience. You can begin cultivating this quality with a simple daily practice. When facing a situation that triggers overthinking, try consciously adopting a don't know attitude. This might sound like, "I don't actually know how this meeting will go," or "I don't know what this person really thinks of me," or even "I don't know what the best decision is right now." Notice how this feels different from the mental stance of trying to figure everything out or pretending certainty. This practice can be particularly powerful when facing major life transitions or difficult decisions. These situations often trigger intense overthinking, precisely because we feel we need to know exactly what will happen before we act. The don't know mind allows us to acknowledge that complete certainty isn't possible, and take thoughtful action anyway. This isn't about making uninformed choices, but about recognizing that no amount of thinking can eliminate all uncertainty from life. Many people find that adopting this approach creates immediate relief from the pressure of overthinking. When we no longer feel obligated to know everything or figure everything out, the mind naturally relaxes. Solutions and insights often emerge more easily from this relaxed state than from intense analytical effort. It's similar to the experience of trying to remember something. The harder we try, the more elusive it becomes. But when we let go, it often surfaces naturally. The don't know mind also helps with one of the most common overthinking triggers, the desire to control outcomes. Much of our circular thinking comes from trying to account for every possible variable and scenario, essentially attempting to control the uncontrollable. When we can genuinely say, "I don't know exactly how this will turn out, and that's okay," we free ourselves from this impossible task. Organizations and workplaces are increasingly recognizing the value of this approach. Some innovative companies now celebrate phrases like, "I don't know, but I'll find out," rather than rewarding employees who pretend to have all the answers. Research in management science shows that teams with leaders who can admit uncertainty and model learning behavior outperform those with leaders who project false certainty. Parents can also benefit greatly from this practice. The pressure to always know what's best for our children can create tremendous anxiety and overthinking. Adopting a don't know mind allows parents to remain thoughtful and responsible while acknowledging the inherent uncertainty of raising children. This modelled comfort with not having all the answers also helps children develop resilience and their own relationship with uncertainty. One common misconception about the don't know mind is that it leads to passive indecision. Actually, the opposite is often true. When we're caught in overthinking, we frequently delay decisions while trying to achieve impossible certainty. The don't know approach helps us make peace with uncertainty, allowing us to make thoughtful choices based on what we do know while accepting what remains unknown. The brain science behind this approach is fascinating. When we encounter uncertainty, the brain's threat detection system often activates, creating anxiety that drives us to seek resolution through thinking. But when we practice accepting uncertainty rather than fighting it, we activate different neural networks associated with curiosity and exploration. This shift changes our relationship with the unknown, from threat to opportunity. This quality of mind becomes especially valuable in our current era of information overload. With virtually unlimited data available on any topic, we can easily fall into the trap of thinking that enough research will lead to complete certainty. The don't know mind reminds us that even with all this information, fundamental uncertainties remain part of the human condition. This perspective doesn't devalue knowledge, but places it in proper context as a tool rather than an ultimate solution to life's complexities. The wisdom of not knowing pairs beautifully with another powerful Zen teaching that helps us work with the content of our thoughts, particularly difficult or negative ones. This is the metaphor of the mind as vast sky and thoughts as passing clouds. A vivid image that offers practical guidance for disidentifying from troubling thought patterns. Imagine standing outside on a partly cloudy day, looking up at the blue sky. Clouds of various shapes and sizes move across your field of vision, some dark and heavy, others light and wispy. Some pass quickly while others seem to linger. Now imagine that your mind is this vast open sky, and your thoughts are simply clouds passing through it. This metaphor offers a profound shift in how we relate to our thoughts, especially negative or repetitive ones that fuel overthinking. Most of us habitually identify with our thoughts. We don't experience ourselves as having thoughts, but as being our thoughts. When a thought like, "I'm not good enough," or "this situation is hopeless," arises, we don't see it as a temporary mental event, but as reality itself. The sky and clouds metaphor helps us recognize that we are not our thoughts. We are the awareness in which thoughts arise and pass away. The sky doesn't become the clouds that move through it. Similarly, our essential awareness doesn't become the thoughts that appear within it. This perspective creates psychological space between ourselves and our thinking, allowing us to observe thoughts without being completely identified with them. Research in cognitive psychology supports the value of this approach. Studies show that the ability to de-center from thoughts, to see them as mental events rather than absolute truths or direct reflections of reality, correlates with decreased depression and anxiety. This skill, sometimes called metacognitive awareness, helps break the cycle of rumination that characterizes overthinking. You can practice working with this metaphor through both formal and informal approaches. As a formal practice, you might set aside 10 minutes daily to sit quietly and watch your thoughts as you would watch clouds in the sky. When you notice yourself getting caught up in a particular thought, gently remind yourself, "This is just a thought passing through the sky of my mind." With practice, this witnessing perspective becomes more accessible, even during challenging emotional states. The informal practice involves bringing this same perspective to daily situations that trigger overthinking. For instance, if you make a mistake at work and notice your mind filling with self-critical thoughts, you can internally note, self-criticism clouds are moving through right now. This doesn't mean dismissing the feedback you might need from the situation, but rather seeing these thoughts as temporary mental events rather than defining truths about who you are. What makes this practice particularly valuable is how it helps us relate more skillfully to difficult thoughts without trying to eliminate them. Many approaches to overthinking focus on thought-stopping techniques or replacing negative thoughts with positive ones. While these can be helpful in some contexts, they often create an internal struggle as we fight against certain thoughts, ironically giving them more energy and attention. The sky and clouds approach offers an alternative, allowing all thoughts to arise and pass naturally while changing our relationship to them. Just as we wouldn't try to fight against or eliminate clouds in the sky, we don't need to struggle against the temporary clouds of our thinking. We can let thoughts be, recognizing their transient nature without granting them the power to define our identity or reality. This metaphor also helps us recognize that just as the sky experiences all kinds of weather, but remains fundamentally unchanged by it. Our basic awareness remains whole regardless of the mental weather passing through it. On some days, the mental sky might be filled with dark storm clouds of worry or anger. On others, it might hold the bright, wispy clouds of pleasant thinking. In all cases, the sky itself, our fundamental awareness, remains spacious and unharmed. People who work with this metaphor over time often report a profound shift in how they experience difficult thinking patterns. Rather than being hijacked by anxious or negative thoughts for hours or days, they develop the ability to recognize, anxiety thinking is happening now, without becoming completely identified with those thoughts. This doesn't mean the thoughts disappear, but they no longer have the same power to control behavior or emotional states. The sky and clouds metaphor can be particularly helpful during significant life challenges when negative thinking tends to intensify. During periods of illness, loss, or major life transitions, we often experience storms of difficult thoughts. The ability to recognize these as passing weather rather than ultimate reality helps us respond to challenges with greater resilience and wisdom. Parents and educators have found creative ways to share this concept with children, helping them develop healthy relationships with their thoughts from an early age. Some use picture books about clouds and skiing, while others lead simple cloud-watching exercises followed by conversations about how thoughts are similar. These approaches help children develop metacognitive skills that can prevent the development of chronic overthinking patterns later in life. What makes this practice accessible to almost everyone is that it doesn't require eliminating or even changing the content of thoughts. Many people who struggle with overthinking have tried unsuccessfully to stop certain thoughts or force their minds to think more positively. The sky and clouds approach suggests that freedom comes not from controlling what clouds appear, but from recognizing that we are the sky, vast enough to hold whatever weather passes through without being defined or diminished by it. The combination of the don't-know mind and the sky and clouds perspective creates a powerful toolkit for addressing overthinking from multiple angles. The don't-know mind helps us relate more wisely to our desire for certainty and control, while the sky and clouds metaphor helps us work skillfully with the actual content of our thoughts, especially difficult ones. Together, they address both the driving forces behind overthinking and our relationship with the thinking process itself. These practices of cultivating a don't-know mind and seeing thoughts as passing clouds give us a foundation for working with overthinking. However, transforming deeply ingrained thinking patterns often requires more than just insight. It requires consistent practice over time. This brings us to another powerful Zen teaching, the story of the monk and the stone, which illustrates the transformative power of conscious persistence. There's an old Zen tale about a monk who decided to polish a large rough stone. Every day he would sit with the stone and patiently rub it with a cloth. Other monks in the monastery were puzzled by his seemingly pointless activity. "What are you doing, Ryadzasan?" they asked. "I'm polishing this stone to make a mirror," he replied. The others laughed, telling him it was impossible to turn a stone into a reflective surface no matter how long he polished it. Nevertheless, the monk continued his practice day after day, year after year, with unwavering dedication. While he never transformed the physical stone into a literal mirror, something more profound occurred. Through his consistent and focused attention, the monk developed extraordinary mental clarity. His mind, initially as rough and opaque as the stone, became reflective and clear, capable of seeing reality without distortion. The true mirror wasn't the stone, but the monk's own consciousness, polished through persistent practice. This story captures something essential about overcoming overthinking that many quick-fix approaches miss. Transforming established mental patterns requires sustained effort over time. Our habitual thought patterns are like deep grooves in the mind created through years of repetition. Just as those grooves weren't formed overnight, they aren't typically transformed through occasional practice or momentary insights. The Buddhist tradition calls this quality of persistent effort virya, often translated as energy, diligence, or enthusiasm. It's considered one of the essential paramitas, or perfections, necessary for spiritual development. What distinguishes virya from ordinary effort is that it combines persistence with mindfulness. It's not just working hard, but working with awareness and appropriate effort. Modern neuroscience confirms what the ancient monks understood intuitively. Consistent practice literally rewires the brain. The concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections throughout life, explains why persistent practice can transform even deeply ingrained thinking patterns. Each time we interrupt an overthinking pattern and respond differently, we strengthen alternative neural pathways. Over time, these new pathways become our default response, rather than the old overthinking habits. What makes the stone polishing metaphor particularly valuable is that it acknowledges the reality of resistance. The monk didn't expect the stone to transform easily or quickly. Similarly, when we begin working with our overthinking patterns, we should expect to encounter resistance and setbacks. The mind has been thinking in certain ways for years or decades. It naturally resists change, not out of malice, but simply through the force of habit. This perspective helps us approach our practice with both patience and persistence. Many people give up on meditation or other mindfulness practices because they don't see immediate results, or because they experience increased awareness of their overthinking rather than immediate relief from it. The stone polishing story reminds us that increased awareness, even if uncomfortable, is actually a sign of progress. We're beginning to see our mental patterns more clearly, which is the first step toward transformation. You can apply this principle of conscious persistence by choosing one simple practice to work with overthinking and committing to it daily, even if only for a few minutes. This might be formal meditation, mindful walking, journaling, or any of the other practices we've discussed. The specific technique matters less than the quality of consistent, mindful engagement. Just as the monk returned to his stone day after day, we return to our practice regardless of whether we feel like it or whether we can see immediate results. This approach runs counter to our culture's emphasis on immediate gratification and quick fixes. We're accustomed to measuring progress in visible, external ways and becoming discouraged when we don't see rapid improvement. The monk polishing the stone reminds us that the most significant changes often happen beneath the surface, invisible at first to ourselves and others. The practice gradually works on us in ways we might not immediately recognize. One powerful way to sustain practice over time is to focus on the process rather than the outcome. The monk didn't sit polishing the stone each day, fixated on when it would become a mirror. He engaged fully with the act of polishing itself. Similarly, we can learn to value our daily mindfulness practice not just as a means to reduce overthinking, but as a worthwhile experience in itself. A time when we're fully engaged with what we're doing rather than lost in automatic thinking. Many people find it helpful to create environmental supports for their practice, physical reminders of their commitment to working with overthinking. Some keep a small stone on their desk or bedside table as a tangible reminder of the principle of conscious persistence. Others use smartphone reminders, post notes in visible locations, or create morning rituals that incorporate their practice. These environmental cues help bridge the gap between good intentions and consistent action. The quality of effort matters as much as its consistency. Forced, aggressive effort often creates additional tension and can actually intensify overthinking. The monk polishing the stone exemplifies a different quality: steady, patient, and relaxed persistence. This balanced effort, neither too tight nor too loose, creates the optimal conditions for transformation. We can check the quality of our efforts by noticing if our practice feels driven by harsh self-criticism or by a genuine care for our well-being. What makes this approach sustainable is that it meets overthinking as a pattern to work with rather than an enemy to defeat. Many people develop an adversarial relationship with their thinking, which creates additional internal conflict. The monk didn't hate the stone for being rough and opaque. He worked with its nature patiently over time. Similarly, we can approach our habitual thought patterns with patience rather than hostility, recognizing that they developed for reasons and will transform through steady practice rather than force. The stone polishing story also reminds us of the power of seemingly small actions repeated consistently. In our search for solutions to overthinking, we might be drawn to dramatic interventions or complex techniques. The monk's approach suggests that simple practices, done consistently with full attention, often create the most profound transformation. This perspective can help us value the ordinary moments of mindfulness in daily life as much as formal meditation or retreat experiences. This practice of conscious persistence helps us develop a quality of mind that can stay with difficulty without immediately reacting or escaping. Many forms of overthinking are actually attempts to avoid uncomfortable feelings or situations. When we develop the capacity to stay present with discomfort, like the monk staying with the seemingly futile task of polishing stone, we naturally become less reactive and less prone to the automatic thinking patterns that drive rumination. While the stone polishing practice emphasizes persistence and gradual transformation, Zen tradition also recognizes that sometimes we need approaches that can quickly interrupt our conceptual thinking and open us to direct experience. This brings us to one of the most famous Zen koans. What is the sound of one hand clapping? This enigmatic question has been used for centuries to help practitioners break free from the limitations of logical thinking that fuel overthinking. The koan of the sound of one hand was created by Hakuin Ekaku, a renowned Japanese Zen master from the 18th century. When new students came to study with him, he would often assign this seemingly nonsensical question as their primary meditation focus. The students would naturally try to solve it logically, offering various explanations or theories. Hakuin would reject all these conceptual answers, pushing students beyond their analytical minds toward direct experience. What makes this koan particularly effective against overthinking is that it's deliberately designed to be unsolvable through logical reasoning. You can't think your way to an answer. Try it yourself. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Your mind likely starts generating possible solutions or explanations, all of which miss the point. The koan creates what Zen calls great doubt, a state where the logical mind exhausts itself and reaches its limits, creating the conditions for a different kind of understanding to emerge. This approach directly addresses one of the core difficulties with overthinking, our mistaken belief that all problems can be solved through more thinking. Many of the situations that trigger our most intense rumination, questions about the meaning of life, complex relationship dynamics, or uncertain future outcomes, simply cannot be resolved through analytical thought alone. Like trying to solve the one-hand koan through logic, these efforts leave us spinning in circles. Working with a koan like this isn't about finding a clever answer, but about experiencing what happens when thinking reaches its limits. With consistent practice, many people experience moments when conceptual thinking temporarily stops, and they encounter reality directly, without the filter of analysis and categorization. These experiences, however brief, can profoundly shift our relationship with thinking, showing us experientially that there's a mode of knowing beyond conceptual thought. You don't need formal Zen training to benefit from the one-hand koan. Try sitting quietly for a few minutes each day with this question, not straining to find an answer, but simply allowing the question to be present. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Notice what happens when your mind exhausts its logical approaches. Pay attention to the quality of mind that remains when thinking temporarily subsides. This practice can create small gaps in habitual thinking that gradually expand with consistent attention. The koan practice works differently from many conventional approaches to overthinking. Rather than trying to replace negative thoughts with positive ones or analysing the content of rumination, it operates at a more fundamental level, questioning the very process of conceptual thinking itself. It helps us recognise that thinking is just one way of knowing, valuable in certain contexts but limited in others. Many people who work with koans report experiencing moments of insight that aren't conceptual breakthroughs, but direct perceptions, unfiltered by analysis. One practitioner described it as suddenly hearing sounds as just sounds, without all the mental commentary about what they mean or where they're coming from. Another noted experiencing colours more vivid than I'd ever seen them, as if I was seeing without the dulling effect of concepts. These direct experiences offer a taste of what's available when we're not caught in conceptual thinking. The one-hand koan also helps address a common trap in working with overthinking, trying to use thinking to stop thinking. Many people attempt to think their way out of overthinking, creating an additional layer of mental activity. The koan cuts through this pattern by presenting a question that thinking simply cannot resolve, no matter how clever or sophisticated the approach. This creates a different relationship with thinking. We begin to recognize its utility for certain tasks while also experiencing its limitations. Brain research offers interesting insights into why koan practice affects thinking patterns. Studies using EEG to measure brain activity during koan meditation show unique patterns distinct from both analytical thinking and concentration practices. Particularly notable is increased activity in regions associated with insight and decreased activity in areas linked to self-referential thinking, precisely the areas that become overactive during rumination and worry. One misconception about koans is that they're merely nonsensical riddles designed to confuse. This misunderstanding leads some to dismiss them as irrelevant word games. In reality, koans were carefully crafted over centuries specifically to address the human tendency toward excessive conceptualization. They are sophisticated psychological tools designed to create particular states of mind conducive to insight and direct experience. The approach represented by the one-hand koan doesn't reject thinking entirely. Zen practitioners recognize the value of clear, logical thought in appropriate contexts. What the koan practice offers is a way to recognize when we're caught in unproductive conceptual loops and access modes of knowing that complement rather than replace analytical thinking. This balanced perspective is particularly valuable in our thought-dominated culture where overthinking is often mistaken for problem-solving. What makes the combination of persistent practice, as in the stone polishing story, and koan work, as in the one-hand koan, particularly effective is that they address different aspects of overthinking. Persistent practice helps us gradually transform habitual thought patterns through consistent attention over time. Koan practice creates opportunities for sudden shifts in perspective that temporarily interrupt conceptual thinking altogether. Together, they offer both gradual cultivation and immediate glimpses of what lies beyond overthinking. These powerful Zen techniques, persistent practice and working with koans, give us tools to address overthinking at a fundamental level. Yet sometimes the most profound teachings come in the form of simple stories that illustrate how we unnecessarily extend our suffering through mental habits. One of the most famous of these stories is the parable of the two monks and the woman, which perfectly captures how we create unnecessary suffering by mentally carrying situations long after they've ended. The story goes like this. Two monks were travelling together, returning to their monastery after a long journey. They came to a river crossing where they met a beautiful young woman in fine silk clothing. She was afraid to cross the river by herself, concerned that the current might ruin her silk garments. Without hesitation, the older monk picked her up, carried her across the river, and set her down safely on the other side. The woman thanked him and went on her way. The two monks continued their journey in silence. After several hours, the younger monk, who had been visibly troubled, couldn't contain himself any longer. He burst out, "As monks, we have taken vows not to touch women. How could you carry that woman across the river?" The older monk replied calmly, "I left the woman at the riverbank hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" This simple story captures perfectly one of the primary mechanisms of overthinking, the tendency to mentally carry situations, conversations, and problems long after the actual event has ended. The older monk dealt with the situation directly and appropriately in the moment, then let it go completely. The younger monk, though physically moving forward, remained mentally stuck at the river crossing, replaying the scene and generating internal conflict for hours. We all do versions of this carrying in daily life. Someone makes a comment in a morning meeting that we perceive as critical, and we're still mentally arguing with them while making dinner that evening. We make a small error at work and continue to replay it mentally days later, long after everyone else has forgotten about it. We have a brief, uncomfortable interaction with a neighbour and then spend hours imagining future scenarios or crafting perfect responses we wish we'd delivered. In each case, like the younger monk, we're carrying situations that have physically ended. This mental carrying creates what psychologists call rumination, repetitive thought patterns that focus on problems, their causes, and consequences rather than solutions. Research shows that rumination is strongly linked to both anxiety and depression. When we ruminate, we typically focus on negative aspects of situations, often distorting them through selective attention. The younger monk focused exclusively on the rule violation, missing the compassionate action his fellow monk had taken to help someone in need. What's particularly valuable about this story is that it provides a simple but powerful question we can ask ourselves when caught in overthinking. Am I still carrying her? This question helps us recognize when we're mentally extending situations beyond their natural conclusion. Just becoming aware that we're engaged in unnecessary carrying creates the possibility of setting down the mental burden. You can incorporate this awareness into daily life by doing a simple check-in practice several times throughout your day. Pause briefly and ask yourself, what am I carrying right now? Notice if you're mentally rehashing past conversations, worrying about future events, or holding on to resentments or concerns that aren't relevant to the present moment. This awareness alone often creates a natural release. For more persistent patterns of carrying, you might establish a more formal letting go practice. Some people find it helpful to write down what they're mentally carrying, then physically crumple or tear the paper as a tangible representation of release. Others use visualization, imagining placing their concerns in a boat and watching it float downstream, or releasing them as balloons into the vast sky. These physical or visualized acts of letting go can help break the abstract cycle of rumination. The story also illustrates an important distinction between responding appropriately to situations when they arise and dwelling on them afterward. The older monk didn't ignore the woman's need. He responded directly and helpfully in the moment. The wisdom wasn't in failing to act, but in not mentally carrying the situation beyond its natural conclusion. This teaches us that mindfulness isn't about being passive, but about engaging appropriately with each situation as it arises, then allowing it to pass. Organisations are increasingly recognising the cost of this mental carrying in professional contexts. When employees ruminate about workplace conflicts, perceived slights, or past mistakes, it significantly impacts productivity, creativity, and well-being. Some forward-thinking companies now incorporate brief mindfulness practices into the workday specifically to help people set down mental burdens between tasks or meetings, allowing them to be more fully present with current priorities. Relationships particularly benefit from this teaching. Much relationship conflict stems from mentally carrying past interactions beyond their natural conclusion. We have a disagreement in the morning, and though it's technically resolved, we continue to silently argue our position or nurse resentment throughout the day. By recognizing when we're still carrying her, we can intentionally set down these mental burdens, allowing relationships to refresh rather than accumulate unseen tensions. Parents can both practice and teach this principle. Children naturally live more in the present. They can be upset the one moment and completely engaged in play the next. As we age, we tend to develop the habit of mentally carrying situations. Parents can model healthy letting go by acknowledging when they have been ruminating and demonstrating how they choose to release it. This teaches children a valuable emotional skill that may help prevent patterns of overthinking later in life. What makes this story particularly powerful is its simplicity and immediate applicability. We don't need special equipment, extensive training, or even formal meditation practice to begin noticing what we're mentally carrying and choosing to set it down. We can start right now in this very moment by checking what outdated situations or concerns we might be unnecessarily carrying and practicing the art of gentle release. The skill of letting go that the two monks' story teaches us connects beautifully with another powerful Zen practice that helps ground us in present moment reality rather than abstract thinking, mindful walking or kinhin. While the parable shows us how to release what we're unnecessarily carrying, walking meditation gives us a way to anchor awareness in direct physical experience, a powerful antidote to the disembodied nature of overthinking. Kinhin is a form of walking meditation practiced in Zen temples between periods of seated meditation. Practitioners walk in a clockwise direction around the meditation hall, typically moving very slowly and deliberately, coordinating each step with their breath. The word comes from Chinese terms meaning sutra walking, as it was originally practiced while reciting sutras or Buddhist texts. In modern practice, it's usually done in silence, with full attention on the physical sensations of walking. What makes kinhin particularly effective for addressing overthinking is how it grounds abstract mental activity in concrete physical experience. When we're caught in overthinking, we're typically disconnected from our bodies, lost in conceptual thought that has little relationship to our immediate physical reality. Walking meditation interrupts this pattern by bringing attention directly to bodily sensations, the feeling of feet touching the ground, the shift of wabu or weight from one leg to the other, the rhythm of breathing coordinated with movement. This grounding effect has been confirmed by research in embodied cognition, which shows that physical states significantly impact mental processes. Studies demonstrate that deliberate physical practices like slow, mindful walking can interrupt rumination by shifting brain activity from areas associated with abstract thinking to those involved in sensory processing and movement. This neurological shift makes it physically harder to maintain cycles of overthinking. You don't need to be in a Zen temple to practice a version of kinhin. You can incorporate mindful walking into daily life in various ways. Even walking from your desk to the bathroom at work can become a brief mindfulness practice if you bring full attention to the physical sensations of walking. Some people designate specific short walks during their day, perhaps from the parking lot to the office or from the train station to home, as times for mindful attention rather than planning or ruminating. For a more formal practice, you might set aside 10 to 15 minutes to walk very slowly around your home or in a quiet outdoor space. Unlike regular walking for exercise or transportation, the emphasis here is on quality of attention rather than destination or speed. You can coordinate your breathing with your steps, perhaps inhaling for 2 steps and exhaling for 3, or simply maintain continuous awareness of physical sensations as you move. What often surprises people when they first try walking meditation is how challenging it can be to maintain attention on something as seemingly simple as walking. The mind habitually wanders back to planning, analysing, or worrying. This isn't a failure, but the practice itself, noticing when attention has drifted into thinking and gently bringing it back to physical sensations. Each time you notice the mind has wandered and return attention to walking, you're strengthening the mental muscle that can interrupt overthinking. Many practitioners find that walking meditation is more accessible than seated meditation, especially when overthinking is intense. The gentle physical movement provides just enough stimulation to keep the mind engaged, while being simple enough to maintain mindful attention. For people who find their thoughts racing when they try to sit still, walking meditation offers an active alternative that can serve as a bridge to other forms of practice. The benefits of regular Kinhin extend beyond the practice period itself. Over time, many people report developing an increased capacity to ground themselves in physical experience during daily activities, especially when they notice overthinking beginning to occur. Having established the neural pathways of shifting from abstract thought to embodied awareness through practice, this movement becomes more available in moments of stress or excessive thinking. Walking meditation also demonstrates a crucial principle for working with overthinking. We don't need to stop thinking completely to find relief from overthinking. The goal isn't a thought-free mind, but rather a different relationship with thinking, one where we can choose to engage with thoughts when useful and shift attention elsewhere when thinking becomes unproductive. Kinhin trains precisely this ability to redirect attention from mental content to direct experience. In traditional Zen practice, Kinhin is often positioned between periods of seated meditation, creating a rhythmic alternation between stillness and movement. This pattern mirrors an important principle for working with overthinking in daily life, the value of alternating different types of attention, rather than trying to maintain any single state continuously. Just as muscles develop through cycles of engagement and rest, our capacity for present moment awareness grows through this rhythmic practice. The practice of mindful walking has been adapted in various therapeutic contexts, particularly for conditions characterized by excessive thinking. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and dialectical behavior therapy both incorporate versions of walking meditation specifically to help clients develop the capacity to step out of rumination cycles and ground awareness in direct experience. Clinical research shows these approaches can significantly reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression, which are often maintained by overthinking patterns. What makes Kinhin particularly valuable in our current era is that walking is something most people do anyway. We don't need to add another activity to our busy schedules, we simply bring a different quality of attention to something we're already doing. In a world where many of us spend hours in front of screens engaged primarily with abstract information, this simple practice of fully inhabiting our moving bodies provides a necessary counterbalance. The combination of the two monks' story and the practice of Kinhin offers complementary approaches to addressing overthinking. The parable teaches us to recognize when we're unnecessarily extending situations through mental carrying, while walking meditation gives us a concrete practice for grounding awareness in present reality, rather than abstract thinking. Together they address both the content of overthinking and the process of shifting attention from mental rumination to direct experience. While walking meditation helps us ground overthinking in physical experience, sometimes we need strategies for situations that demand action and performance. This brings us to another powerful Zen story, the tale of the Zen archer, which offers profound insights about how overthinking often impedes our ability to act effectively in the world. One of the most famous stories in Zen literature involves a master archer and his student. After years of technical training, the student had developed impeccable form and technique. He could hit targets consistently under controlled conditions, but something was still missing from his archery. His master observed that when facing important competitions or demonstrations, the student would become tense, overthinking every aspect of his shot, the angle of his arm, the tension of the bowstring, the direction of the wind, and countless other variables. This mental noise prevented the fluid, natural action needed for true mastery. The master decided to teach him differently. "Come with me to the cliff edge tomorrow, at dawn," he instructed. The next morning, the master set up a target on a tree near a sheer drop. He then told the student to stand with his heels at the very edge of the cliff, with the abyss directly behind him. From this precarious position, the student was instructed to draw his bow and hit the target. Terrified, the student protested, "I can't focus on perfect technique while worrying about falling to my death." The master replied, "Exactly. Stop trying to shoot perfectly, just shoot." With no option for careful analysis, the student had to rely on something beyond thinking, drawing his bow with complete attention to the present moment rather than mental calculations about technique. He released the arrow, which flew straight to the centre of the target. This story captures a phenomenon many of us have experienced: how overthinking can actually interfere with performance rather than enhance it. Athletes call it choking, musicians refer to it as getting in your own way, and performers describe it as paralysis by analysis. It's what happens when conscious thinking disrupts activities that are best performed through trained intuition. The science behind this phenomenon is fascinating. Research in cognitive psychology and neuroscience distinguishes between two types of processing: explicit, conscious, analytical thinking, and implicit, intuitive, automatic processing. Skills that have been thoroughly learned often perform best when executed through implicit processing. When we overthink these activities, we actually interfere with the brain's more efficient automatic systems. You can observe this in simple everyday actions. When you first learned to tie your shoes, you needed conscious attention on each step. Now you can do it automatically, unless you start thinking about exactly how you're doing it, which often causes confusion and errors. The same principle applies to more complex skills like playing an instrument, public speaking, or athletic performance. Overthinking creates a bottleneck where fluid action would otherwise occur. The Zen archery tradition, known as Kyudo, is practiced not merely as a sport but as a form of moving meditation specifically designed to address this interface between thinking and action. The practitioner works to develop what's called mushin, or no mind, a state of awareness free from distracting thoughts, allowing complete immersion in the activity. This isn't an absence of consciousness, but rather a different quality of awareness, direct and intuitive rather than analytical and separated. Many highly skilled performers in various fields describe a similar state, often called flow or being in the zone. In this state, action seems to happen effortlessly, without the usual sense of a separate self directing each movement. Research on flow states shows they're characterized by reduced activity in the brain's default mode network, the same network that becomes overactive during rumination and overthinking. In other words, flow is neurologically the opposite of overthinking. The Archer story offers practical guidance for addressing overthinking in performance situations. Other than trying to control every variable through analysis, we can practice trusting the training we've already internalized. This doesn't mean abandoning preparation or practice. The Archer had trained for years before the cliff episode. It means recognizing when thinking has served its purpose and needs to step aside for direct action. You can apply this principle in various areas of life where overthinking impedes performance. Before giving a presentation, musicians and public speakers often find that focusing on technical details in the final moments creates tension and errors. Instead, many successful performers use pre-performance rituals that activate a more intuitive state, perhaps taking a few deep breaths, recalling a time they performed naturally and well, or focusing on communicating with the audience rather than on technical perfection. For writers facing blank page paralysis, the Archer's lesson suggests setting aside concerns about perfect word choice or structure and simply beginning to write without self-judgment. Many productive writers use timed sessions where they commit to writing continuously without editing or critiquing, allowing the natural flow of ideas to emerge before the analytical mind evaluates them. In conversations and social interactions, overthinking often creates awkwardness rather than connection. When we're mentally monitoring our every word and analysing others' reactions, we're not fully present in the exchange. The Archer's approach suggests trusting our natural social capacities rather than trying to mentally manage every aspect of the interaction. Decision-making offers another area where the Archer's lesson applies. When facing important choices, many people gather information and analyse options, which is appropriate up to a point. However, there often comes a moment when additional analysis yields diminishing returns, creating paralysis rather than clarity. Many successful decision-makers describe a practice of thorough preparation followed by a period of letting go, allowing their intuitive knowledge to inform the final choice. What makes the Zen Archer story particularly valuable is that it addresses the paradox of expertise. As we develop mastery in any area, we need to move from conscious competence to unconscious competence, allowing the skills we've developed to operate without constant supervision from our analytical mind. This transition often feels counterintuitive. We want to try harder and think more carefully precisely when we need to trust the learning that has already been integrated. The archer at the cliff edge found that the removal of the option to overthink through the introduction of real danger actually improved his performance rather than hindering it. While we don't need to put ourselves in physical danger, we can create conditions that discourage overthinking. Some writers disconnect from the internet while drafting. Some musicians record themselves without the option to stop and restart. Some speakers deliberately practice with distractions present. These approaches help develop the capacity to perform from intuitive knowledge rather than analytical oversight. This state of action beyond overthinking isn't limited to specialized skills or exceptional circumstances. We can bring this quality to ordinary activities, cooking a meal, having a conversation, solving a work problem. The key is recognizing when thinking has fulfilled its preparatory role and now needs to step back, allowing direct engagement with the activity at hand. This balance between appropriate thinking and intuitive action represents a middle path between thoughtlessness and overthinking. The archer's experience at the cliff edge demonstrates how sometimes the very conditions we think would impair our performance, pressure, constraints or limitations, can actually bypass our tendency to overthink and access more direct, effective ways of responding. This insight connects beautifully with another powerful Zen teaching about self-observation, the story of the monk and the mirror, which offers guidance on how to observe our mental patterns with the same directness and clarity. There's a Zen story about a monk who lived near a lake with particularly clear, still waters. Each morning at dawn he would go to the lakeshore and gaze at his reflection in the water. This wasn't vanity, but a practice of self-observation. Over time, he became skilled at noticing subtle changes in his reflection. How tension would appear around his eyes when he was worried, how his posture would shift when he was avoiding something difficult, how his expression would soften when he was at peace. One day a storm muddied the waters, making reflection impossible. The monk realized he had become dependent on the external mirror. He decided to develop the capacity to observe his own mind directly, without needing the reflection in the water. Through patient practice, he learned to monitor his internal states with the same objective clarity with which he had observed his external reflection, noticing thoughts, emotions, and sensations arising and passing without becoming entangled in them. This story illustrates a crucial skill for addressing overthinking, the capacity for metacognition, observing our own thought patterns with clarity and objectivity rather than being completely identified with them. The monk learned to watch his mind the way he had watched his reflection, neither suppressing what he saw nor becoming captivated by it. Modern psychology calls this capacity metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe our own thinking processes. Research shows this skill is significantly underdeveloped in people who struggle with chronic overthinking. They tend to be fully immersed in their thoughts rather than having the capacity to step back and observe thinking as a process. The good news is that this ability can be systematically developed through specific practices. Unlike the cliff edge archery lesson that creates conditions where thinking must give way to intuitive action, the mirror practice cultivates our capacity to observe thinking itself with greater clarity. It doesn't eliminate thinking but changes our relationship to it, from being unconsciously driven by thoughts to consciously witnessing them. This shift creates the possibility of choosing which thoughts to engage with rather than automatically following every mental impulse. You can develop this Iriya-like awareness through regular practice. Set aside a few minutes each day to sit quietly and observe your mental activity with the attitude of a neutral witness. Notice thoughts arising without immediately believing them, rejecting them, or following their storylines. Pay attention to patterns, recurring worries, habitual self-criticisms, common distractions. Just as the monk noticed subtle changes in his reflection, you can begin to recognize your characteristic thought patterns with increasing clarity. Many people find it helpful to name the patterns they observe. Planning mind is active right now, or worrying about what others think is happening, or replaying that conversation again. This simple naming creates a small but crucial space between yourself and the thinking process. You're not trying to stop these patterns, but simply becoming aware of them as patterns rather than absolute reality. The mirror practice differs from many approaches to overthinking in an important way. It doesn't primarily focus on changing the content of thoughts, but on changing the context in which they occur. Rather than trying to replace negative thoughts with positive ones, which can sometimes create another layer of mental activity, it develops the container of awareness in which all thoughts arise. As this awareness strengthens, thoughts naturally have less grip even when their content remains unchanged. What makes this practice particularly powerful for addressing overthinking is that it works directly with the mechanisms of identification and attachment that drive rumination. When we're caught in overthinking, we're typically completely identified with a particular thought stream and attached to certain outcomes. The mirror-like awareness helps us recognize this is thinking happening, rather than this is the truth about me or my situation. This shift creates freedom even when difficult thoughts continue to arise. Many people report that regular practice of this kind of self-observation leads to surprising insights about their thinking patterns. They begin to notice how certain thoughts appear at particular times of day, how some thoughts trigger predictable emotional responses, or how physical states like hunger or fatigue influence thinking. These observations aren't judgmental but simply clear-seeing, like the monk noticing changes in his reflection. Organizations and workplaces are increasingly incorporating versions of this practice to help employees develop self-awareness and resilience. Programs teach basics of metacognitive monitoring, how to observe stress responses, recognize when thinking has become unproductive, and shift into more effective mental states. These skills help prevent the performance and decision-making problems that often accompany overthinking in professional contexts. For those in creative fields, this mirror-like awareness offers a way to work skillfully with the inner critic, that voice of judgment and evaluation that can paralyze creative expression. Rather than fighting against self-critical thoughts or being defeated by them, practitioners learn to observe them as just one aspect of the creative process, neither suppressing them nor giving them final authority. This balanced awareness allows creative work to continue even when difficult thoughts arise. The combination of the archer's lesson and the monk's mirror practice offers complementary approaches to working with overthinking. The archer teaches us to access states beyond thinking when direct action is needed, while the mirror practice helps us develop clearer awareness of our thinking patterns when observation is appropriate. Together, they represent a balanced approach, knowing when to step beyond thinking into direct action and when to bring clear awareness to the thinking process itself. These complementary approaches of knowing when to act intuitively and when to observe our thoughts with clarity give us valuable tools for working with overthinking. However, much of our excessive thinking is driven by something even more fundamental, our constant internal dialogue. This brings us to a powerful Zen practice, the cultivation of noble smayanas, which offers a direct way to calm the verbal chatter that fuels much of our overthinking. Noble science, or mauna in Sanskrit, is a practice found across various contemplative traditions, particularly in Zen Buddhism. It refers not just to external silence, refraining from speaking, but more importantly to internal silence, the temporary quieting of the constant verbal commentary running through our minds. This inner monologue is so persistent that many of us don't even notice it as a distinct phenomenon. It feels like thinking itself. Yet research suggests that this internal verbalization is just one type of mental activity, and excessive internal dialogue often drives the most draining forms of overthinking. The practice of noble silence emerged from the observation that much of our mental suffering comes from unnecessary verbalization. We constantly narrate our experiences, evaluate situations, replay conversations, rehearse future interactions, and maintain running commentary on everything happening around us. This verbal layer often disconnects us from direct experience and creates problems that don't actually exist in the present moment. In traditional Zen monasteries, practitioners observe periods of complete silence lasting from several hours to many days. During these times, not only is external speaking suspended, but practitioners also work to notice and gradually reduce internal verbalization. This doesn't mean forcing the mind to be completely silent, which typically creates more tension and internal chatter, but rather developing the capacity to recognize verbal thinking and allow it to naturally settle. The effects of this practice can be profound. Many people who participate in silent retreats report experiencing states of clarity and peace they've never encountered in ordinary life. Neuroimaging studies show that extended periods of silence are associated with increased activity in brain regions related to sensory awareness and decreased activity in areas linked to verbal processing and self-referential thinking, precisely the areas that become overactive during overthinking. You don't need to attend a formal retreat to benefit from this practice. Even short periods of intentional silence incorporated into daily life can begin to shift your relationship with internal dialogue. You might start with just 5 minutes each day, perhaps first thing in the morning or during a lunch break, where you sit quietly and notice the verbal stream of consciousness. Don't try to stop it, but simply observe when you're caught in internal conversation and gently bring attention to non-verbal aspects of experience, physical sensations, sounds around you, or the movement of breath. Many people find it helpful to incorporate some form of physical activity during periods of intentional silence. Walking, gardening, washing dishes, or other simple tasks can provide a focus for attention that makes it easier to notice when the mind slips into unnecessary verbalization. The key is bringing awareness to the verbal nature of much thinking, rather than getting caught in the content of thoughts. One particularly effective approach involves creating a small gap of silence before speaking. In daily conversations, we often respond almost automatically, with minimal space between hearing and replying. Try deliberately pausing for a few seconds before responding in conversations. This tiny gap allows you to notice the internal formulation of words before they're expressed externally. Over time, this practice creates increased awareness of the verbal component of thinking and the possibility of choice about which thoughts to express. The benefits of cultivating periods of inner silence extend well beyond the practice periods themselves. Many people report that regular silent practice creates a kind of background awareness of internal dialogue throughout their day. They become more likely to notice when verbal thinking is becoming excessive or unproductive and can choose to shift attention elsewhere rather than being unconsciously driven by mental chatter. This awareness of internal dialogue is particularly valuable for specific overthinking triggers like insomnia, social anxiety, and performance pressure. When trying to fall asleep, many people get caught in verbal planning, replaying the day's events, or worrying about tomorrow. Recognizing the verbal nature of this activity makes it easier to shift to non-verbal awareness of the body and breath, which naturally supports the transition to sleep. In social situations, overthinking often takes the form of excessive internal commentary about how we're being perceived or what we should say next. This self-conscious verbalization actually interferes with natural social connection. The practice of noble silence helps us recognize this internal chatter and return to direct engagement with the people we're with, improving both social comfort and authentic connection. For those in creative or performance fields, internal verbal criticism can severely limit expression. The voice that constantly evaluates and judges our work as it's being created often stops the creative process before it can fully emerge. Silent practice helps us recognize this critical voice as just one type of mental activity rather than the final authority on our work. Organizations increasingly recognize the value of silence in workplace settings. Some forward-thinking companies incorporate silent meetings, where participants spend the first several minutes quietly reflecting on a topic before discussion begins. Others create quiet zones, where employees can work without conversation for certain periods. These practices help reduce the cognitive overload that comes from constant verbal processing and support clearer thinking on complex issues. What makes the practice of noble silence particularly valuable in our current era is its direct opposition to the constant input that characterizes modern life. Many of us move through our days with minimal external silence, surrounded by conversations, media, notifications, and entertainment. This external noise naturally feeds internal noise, creating ideal conditions for overthinking. Deliberate periods of silence provide a necessary counterbalance, allowing the mind's verbal centers to rest and recover. The silence practice doesn't aim to eliminate internal dialogue completely. Verbal thinking serves many valuable purposes in planning, learning, and communication. Rather, it helps us recognize when verbal processing has exceeded its useful function and become an obstacle to clarity and peace. Through regular practice, many people develop an intuitive sense of when thinking is serving them and when it has become excessive, allowing them to shift mental gears accordingly. This cultivation of awareness around our internal dialogue connects naturally to another powerful metaphor from Buddhist tradition, the concept of the mind as a garden that requires intentional tending. While noble silence helps us create space from excessive verbalization, the mental gardening approach offers guidance on actively shaping our mental landscape over time. The garden metaphor appears throughout Buddhist texts and teachings, offering a practical framework for understanding how thoughts develop and how we can influence their patterns. Just as a garden contains various plants, some cultivated, others wild, some beneficial, others harmful, our minds contain various thought patterns with different qualities and effects. And just as a garden doesn't maintain itself but requires regular attention from the gardener, our mental patterns require conscious tending rather than neglectful abandonment. This approach recognizes several key principles about how thoughts work. First, thoughts are conditional. They arise from specific causes and conditions rather than appearing randomly or defining who we essentially are. Second, thoughts have varying qualities. Some create suffering and a confusion, while others promote clarity and well-being. Third, we can influence which thought patterns strengthen and which diminish through how we direct our attention and what mental habits we practice. The gardening metaphor offers practical guidance for working with overthinking that differs from many modern approaches. Rather than focusing exclusively on eliminating negative thoughts, which often creates resistance and additional thinking, it emphasizes cultivating positive mental states that naturally displace unhelpful patterns. Just as the most effective way to reduce weeds in a garden is often to grow healthy plants that compete for the same resources, we can reduce overthinking by strengthening mental qualities that naturally counterbalance it. In traditional Buddhist psychology, these positive mental qualities include gratitude, compassion, equanimity, and sympathetic joy. Modern psychological research confirms that regularly practicing these states creates measurable changes in brain function and subjective well-being. For instance, studies show that gratitude practices reduce rumination while increasing positive emotion and life satisfaction. Compassion practices decrease self-focused overthinking while improving social connection and resilience. You can apply this approach through regular mental gardening sessions, brief daily practices where you deliberately cultivate specific positive mental states. For instance, you might spend 5 minutes each morning recalling things you're genuinely grateful for, allowing yourself to fully experience the feeling of appreciation rather than just creating a mental list. Or you might practice sending well wishes to yourself and others, deliberately generating feelings of kindness and goodwill. What makes this approach particularly effective for overthinking is that it works indirectly rather than through direct suppression of unwanted thoughts. Many people who struggle with overthinking have tried to force their minds to stop certain thought patterns, only to find that resistance often strengthens what they're trying to eliminate. The gardening approach acknowledges that directly fighting against thoughts often energizes them. Instead, it focuses on creating conditions where helpful states naturally grow stronger, while unhelpful ones gradually diminish from lack of reinforcement. The mental gardening metaphor also helps us work more skillfully with the conditions that influence thinking patterns. Just as a physical garden is affected by soil quality, sunlight, water, and other environmental factors, our mental garden is influenced by physical health, social connections, information diet, and other life circumstances. By attending to these conditions, we create an environment where healthy thought patterns can naturally flourish. Physical movement, adequate sleep, and nutrition significantly impact mental patterns. Research consistently shows that regular exercise reduces rumination and worry while improving cognitive flexibility, rather than seeing physical care as separate from mental well-being. The gardening approach recognizes it as creating essential conditions for mental clarity. Similarly, our social connections profoundly influence thought patterns. Regular positive social interaction naturally reduces self-referential thinking, the me-focused processing that drives much overthinking. From the gardening perspective, cultivating healthy relationships becomes a core practice for mental well-being rather than a distraction from real inner work. The information we consume through media, conversations, reading, and entertainment provides seeds and fertilizer for our mental garden. Many people who struggle with overthinking unwittingly feed their condition through constant consumption of anxiety-producing news, critical social media, or entertainment that reinforces worry. The gardening approach involves becoming more selective about mental inputs, choosing sources of information that support clarity and perspective rather than confusion and reactivity. Organizations and educational institutions are beginning to incorporate this approach into their well-being programs, teaching people not just to manage stress, but to actively cultivate mental qualities that support resilience and clarity. Rather than focusing exclusively on reducing negative states, these programs emphasize regular practice of positive states like appreciation, purpose, and connection. What makes the gardening metaphor particularly valuable is its emphasis on regular, consistent care, rather than dramatic intervention. Just as a garden doesn't transform overnight but through daily attention over seasons, our mental patterns shift gradually through consistent practice. This perspective helps counter the impatience that often accompanies efforts to address overthinking, creating realistic expectations about how mental change occurs and supporting long-term commitment to practice. The noble silence practice and mental gardening approach complement each other beautifully as strategies for addressing overthinking. Silence creates space from excessive verbalization and allows us to see our thought patterns more clearly, while mental gardening offers guidance on actively shaping those patterns over time. Together, they address both the immediate experience of overthinking and the long-term cultivation of mental habits that naturally support clarity and peace. These complementary approaches of noble silence and mental gardening help us address overthinking by creating inner quiet and cultivating positive mental states. But there's another powerful factor that contributes to mental clarity or confusion: our external environment and possessions. This brings us to one of Zen's most practical teachings, illustrated in the story of the Master and the Rice Bowl, which offers profound insights about how simplicity supports mental freedom. There's a famous Zen story about a monk who travelled with nothing but a simple rice bowl. One day he encountered a master who lived with even greater simplicity. Seeing the monk's bowl, the master commented, "That's a nice bowl, but it's still a possession that can own you." The monk defended his bowl, explaining how practical and minimal it was, just one item to maintain. That night, the monk couldn't sleep, worrying about his bowl, whether someone might steal it or if it might get damaged. Reflecting on his restlessness, he realized the master was right. The next morning, he deliberately broke the bowl and continued his journey without it. This story captures something essential about the relationship between our possessions and our minds. Even one simple item, in this case a rice bowl, created attachment and worry for the monk. His thinking became occupied with protecting and maintaining this possession, distracting him from his spiritual practice and peace of mind. By letting go of the bowl, he freed not just his hands, but his mind. The principle of deliberate simplicity stands in stark contrast to our modern consumer culture, which constantly encourages accumulation and attachment to material things. Most of us have experienced how possessions, even ones we initially desired, often create unexpected mental burdens. They need to be maintained, protected, stored, cleaned, organized, upgraded, and eventually disposed of. Each item we own creates a small thread of mental attention, and collectively, these threads can weave a complex web that traps our thinking. Research in cognitive science and psychology increasingly confirms what Zen practitioners have long understood: physical clutter directly impacts mental clarity. Studies show that people perform tasks less efficiently and experience more stress when working in cluttered environments. Brain scans reveal that multiple visible objects compete for neural representation, essentially creating a burden on mental resources even when we're not consciously thinking about those objects. The rice bowl story isn't advocating for owning nothing. The point isn't extreme asceticism for its own sake. Rather, it invites us to become more conscious of the mental effects of our possessions and to deliberately choose simplicity where it supports freedom and clarity. This means different things for different people. For some, it might mean drastically reducing possessions to just the essentials. For others, it might mean being more intentional about what they bring into their homes and lives. You can begin applying this principle by conducting a simple experiment. Choose one area of your living space, perhaps a desk, a closet, or even just a drawer, and deliberately simplify it, removing everything that isn't essential or deeply meaningful. Notice how you feel when using or looking at this space compared to more cluttered areas. Many people report experiencing an immediate sense of mental relief and clarity when interacting with simplified spaces, as if the physical emptiness creates a corresponding mental spaciousness. Digital simplification often provides similar benefits. Most of us carry devices that connect us to virtually infinite information, entertainment, and social interaction. While these connections offer many benefits, they also create ideal conditions for overthinking through constant input and notification. Creating boundaries around digital consumption, perhaps through designated tech-free periods, curated information sources, or simplified device settings, can significantly reduce mental clutter. The practice of simplification extends beyond physical and digital objects to activities and commitments. Many people find their minds overwhelmed not just by possessions, but by crowded calendars and excessive responsibilities. Just as the monk realized his bowl created unexpected mental burden, we might discover that certain activities or commitments, even ones we initially valued, have become sources of mental clutter rather than fulfillment. Deliberate simplicity involves regularly asking, what can I let go of that would create more mental space? This question applies to possessions, activities, relationships, and even beliefs or identities that may have outlived their usefulness. The answers will differ for each person and may change throughout different life phases. What remains constant is the principle that external simplification often leads to internal clarity. Organizations increasingly recognize the value of this approach. Some innovative companies have moved away from open office layouts filled with visual stimulation toward more minimal environments that support focused thinking. Others implement simplicity protocols for meetings, communications, and project management, recognizing that complexity often generates overthinking and inefficiency rather than better results. What makes the rice bowl story particularly powerful is how it highlights the subtle nature of attachment. The monk's bowl was not obviously excessive. It was a simple, practical item that served an essential function. Yet even this minimal possession created mental clinging. This suggests that the issue isn't necessarily how many things we own, but our relationship with whether we possess them or they possess us. For those who struggle with overthinking, the practice of deliberate simplification offers a tangible, external approach that complements more internal practices like meditation. While simplification alone may not eliminate overthinking, it creates conditions where mental clarity becomes more accessible. Like clearing brush from a path, removing unnecessary physical and commitment clutter makes the journey toward mental peace more direct. The story also reminds us that letting go, whether of possessions, activities, or ideas, often involves some initial discomfort or resistance. The monk was initially defensive about his bowl and had to experience the distress of attachment firsthand before choosing to release it. Similarly, many of us feel initial resistance to simplifying, fearing we might need discarded items later, or that we'll somehow lose part of our identity along with our possessions. Recognizing this resistance as part of the process helps us move through it with greater awareness. This teaching about simplicity connects beautifully with our final Zen practice for addressing overthinking, the mountain meditation, which offers a powerful approach to developing inner stability regardless of external circumstances. While simplicity helps reduce external triggers for overthinking, mountain meditation cultivates the internal quality of steadiness that allows us to remain centered even amid life's inevitable complexities and challenges. The mountain meditation is a guided visualization practice that originated in Zen Buddhism but has been adapted and incorporated into various mindfulness programs worldwide, including Jon Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction program. The practice invites us to embody the qualities of a mountain, solid, stable, and unmoving despite changing weather conditions, seasons, and external events. The traditional practice begins by visualizing a mountain, perhaps one you've seen in person or in images, noting its qualities of stability, mass, and groundedness. You then imagine yourself becoming the mountain, embodying these same qualities in your posture and awareness. As you continue the meditation, you visualize various conditions passing around the mountain. Storms with lightning and fierce winds, snow blanketing its surface, fog obscuring its features, sunshine warming its slopes, and the gift cycle of seasons transforming the landscape. Throughout these changing conditions, the mountain itself remains essentially the same, present, unwavering, and dignified. This visualization directly addresses one of the core mechanisms of overthinking, our tendency to be mentally and emotionally carried away by changing circumstances, both external events and internal states. Just as weather systems move across a mountain without changing its fundamental nature, the practice suggests that we can remain grounded even as thoughts, emotions, and situations flow through our experience. What makes this practice particularly effective for overthinking is how it works with the body as well as the mind. The physical posture adopted during mountain meditation, sitting with a straight spine, shoulders relaxed but dignified, and a sense of being rooted downward, creates somatic feedback that reinforces mental stability. Research in embodied cognition shows that physical posture significantly influences psychological states. The mountain posture literally helps us feel more grounded and stable, making it harder for thinking to carry us away. You can practice a simplified version of mountain meditation in just a few minutes. Sit in a comfortable but upright position, feeling the points of contact between your body and the chair or floor. Imagine strength and stability flowing from these contact points through your entire body. As you breathe, visualize yourself as having the solid, immovable quality of a mountain, with your awareness extending from your base deep into the earth and from your head high into the sky. When you notice thoughts arising, imagine them as clouds passing across the mountain of your awareness, visible but not disturbing your fundamental stability. The mountain quality is particularly valuable during times of stress, transition, or emotional intensity, precisely the conditions that tend to trigger overthinking. Many practitioners report that regularly cultivating this mountain-like stability creates an internal reference point they can return to when thoughts become overwhelming. Rather than being completely identified with swirling thoughts, they can reconnect with a more stable sense of awareness from which thinking can be observed rather than lived within. Organisations and schools have begun incorporating versions of this practice to help people maintain focus and equilibrium during challenging situations. Some healthcare settings teach simplified mountain meditation to patients facing illness or difficult treatments. Business leaders use the practice to stay grounded during organisational change or high-pressure decision-making. Educators teach child-friendly versions to help students maintain composure during tests or social challenges. What distinguishes mountain meditation from some other approaches to overthinking is its emphasis on stability rather than elimination. The goal isn't to have no thoughts or to experience only positive emotions, but rather to develop the capacity to remain centered even when difficult thoughts and feelings arise. This aligns with the Zen understanding that attempting to eliminate certain experiences often creates additional struggle, while developing stability allows all experiences to be held with greater ease. The practice also addresses a common misconception about mindfulness, that it's primarily about relaxation or feeling good. While the mountain meditation often does create a sense of calm, its deeper purpose is to cultivate a quality of awareness that remains stable across all emotional states, both pleasant and unpleasant. This stability provides the foundation for responding wisely to life situations, rather than reacting automatically from overthinking patterns. Brain research offers interesting insights into why this practice works. Studies show that visualizations like the mountain meditation activate similar neural networks to actual physical experiences. When we imagine embodying mountain-like qualities, the brain responds in ways that parallel actually having those experiences. Additionally, the practice strengthens connections between brain regions involved in bodily awareness and those involved in emotional regulation, connections that tend to be weaker in people prone to overthinking. The mountain meditation complements the other practices we've explored by offering a specific quality of awareness that can be cultivated and returned to. While techniques like the empty cup create space for new perspectives and walking meditation grounds us in physical experience, mountain meditation develops the internal stability that allows us to work skillfully with whatever arises in that space or experience. As we conclude our exploration of these 20 Zen stories and practices for addressing overthinking, it's worth noting how they work together as a comprehensive approach. From the empty cup that teaches us to release preconceptions to the monk and tiger showing us how to live in the present moment, through practices of non-attachment, simplicity and stability, each offering addresses different aspects of our tendency toward excessive thinking. Together, they provide not just techniques, but a way of relating to thought itself that creates the possibility of greater freedom, clarity and peace, even in our complex modern world.